Roger Federer said something recently that he really didn't need to say, and that's exactly why nobody in the tennis world has been able to stop talking about it. This wasn't a casual comment dropped in passing. It wasn't a polite compliment about someone's backhand. It wasn't even criticism the way we normally hear it from public figures. It was something closer to a warning. And it came from a man who almost never warns anyone publicly. When Federer opened his mouth and brought up Alex Eala by name, the energy in the room changed on the spot. Fans leaned in. Journalists stopped typing. And in that single moment, the entire career narrative of one of tennis's most exciting young stars quietly shifted in a direction nobody expected. Because here's the thing about Roger Federer. When he speaks with concern instead of admiration, it means something real is happening underneath the surface, something the public was never really supposed to see. If you've been following this channel and you care about what's really going on in women's tennis beyond the highlights and the press releases, make sure you're subscribed. Hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next, because this story is only getting bigger. Now, back to how this all started. It unfolded in Basel, a city that knows Federer better than anywhere else on earth. The press conference was completely routine at first. Questions about the future of the sport, about young talent coming through, about how the game is changing. Federer was answering the way he always does, calmly, thoughtfully, giving responses that were warm but careful. Then somebody asked about the next generation of women's tennis. A simple enough question on the surface. Federer paused. Not the kind of polite pause where someone is just searching for the right word. This was heavier. It felt loaded, like he was deciding something. When he finally spoke, he didn't list a bunch of names. He didn't rattle off the usual prospects. He focused on one player, Alex Eala. And the way he said her name told everyone in that room that this was not going to be a normal answer. "She's incredibly talented," he said. That part felt expected, fine, normal, the kind of thing you'd say about any rising star. But then his tone changed. His voice dropped slightly. His expression shifted in a way that cameras only catch when something genuine is happening. And he said this, "But I sometimes wonder if she's still playing her own game." That sentence hit the room like a cold wave. Everything went quiet. Not polite quiet, uncomfortable quiet. The kind where journalists look at each other because they all understood what he was suggesting, even though he hadn't explained a single thing yet. He kept going, carefully, but with clear intention. He talked about what happens to young players when success arrives too early, how winning attracts systems around you, sponsors, federations, schedules, expectations, how quickly all of that can grow into something that's harder to control than the tennis itself. And then he said the line that really changed everything. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect players end up controlling them, and I've heard things about Alex's situation that worry me. He didn't say what he'd heard. He didn't name anyone. He didn't spell out details. He didn't have to. The suggestion alone was more powerful than any direct accusation could have been. Roger Federer, the man who spent his entire career being measured, respectful, and almost surgically careful with his words in public, had just told the world that something wasn't right behind the scenes of one of tennis's most celebrated young careers. The press conference moved on within minutes, but the damage, or the revelation, depending on how you look at it, was already out. The clip spread faster than anyone could contain. Social media caught fire. Headlines appeared within the hour. And a question started circulating, quietly at first, then louder with every passing hour. What exactly is going on with Alex Eala? To understand why Federer's words landed with such force, you first need to understand who Alex Eala actually is and what she represents. She isn't just another promising junior who made the jump to professional tennis. She is a symbol, a first, a national hope that got placed on the shoulders of one teenager before she was old enough to fully understand what that meant. When she won the US Open girls singles title in 2022, it was more than a trophy. It was history. The Philippines had never seen anything like it. Overnight, Alex didn't just become a player. She became proof that a country without a deep tennis tradition could produce a genuine champion. And with that proof came a weight of expectation that no teenager should ever have to carry alone. She was born in 2005, and her talent was obvious early, too obvious to ignore. Her family made a decision that would define everything that came after. At just 11 years old, Alex left home and moved to Spain to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy. 11 years old. Different country, different language, different culture, different everything. While most kids her age were still figuring out how to be kids, Alex was already learning how to be a professional, training on clay courts every day, building her game like her future depended on it, because in many ways it did.
The academy sharpened her. Results followed. Rankings climbed. The spotlight got brighter with every step she took. By the time she was in her mid-teens, Alex Eala wasn't just a player with potential. She was a brand in the making. Sponsors noticed, media coverage expanded. The Philippine Tennis Federation invested heavily. Every match became a measuring point. Every result got analyzed. Every loss needed explaining. From the outside, it looked like a dream. World-class training, global exposure, national support behind her. But inside that dream was pressure of a kind that doesn't show up in the highlight packages. Because Alex wasn't just playing tennis anymore, she was representing an entire nation, justifying major investments, fulfilling contracts, and living up to expectations that kept growing no matter what she did. When she turned professional, most players her age are still figuring out their feet on tour. Alex already had a full ecosystem around her: agents, sponsors, federation officials, coaches rotating in and out, schedules packed tight, public appearances woven between tournaments. There was very little room for error, and even less room for personal choice. Insiders started whispering, nothing loud, nothing concrete, just patterns, coaching changes that didn't quite make sense from a development perspective, tournament schedules that looked aggressive for someone still physically maturing, obligations that seemed to be built around visibility rather than long-term growth. These whispers never really broke through to the mainstream until Federer gave them a voice. Because Federer has seen this story before. He's watched young players shoot up fast and burn out just as quickly. He's seen careers fall apart not because of injuries, but because of lost control. When he looked at Alex Eala, he didn't just see talent, he saw warning signs he recognized. That's what gave his comment its weight, not because it made accusations, but because it confirmed something many people had quietly suspected might be real. And once that door got opened, there was no closing it again. The internet divided almost immediately. Some fans defended Alex right away, saying she was perfectly fine, that Federer had no business speculating publicly about her situation. Others defended Federer, pointing out that he almost never speaks without a reason, that a man of his experience and status doesn't drop comments like that carelessly. Analysts started digging. Old interviews surfaced. Match schedules got laid out side by side. Coaching timelines were traced. Patterns started to emerge. Not definite conclusions, but enough to make people genuinely uncomfortable. Enough to make one thing clear. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was a conversation tennis wasn't prepared for, but couldn't avoid. In the most telling detail of all, Alex Eala said nothing. No statement, no clarification, no denial. Just silence. A silence that only made Federer's words echo louder in every direction. Because when a story this significant meets silence this complete, it stops being about speculation and starts being about something else entirely: power, control, and who actually holds it. Once the words were out in the world, the tennis community didn't just discuss them, it dissected them. Every sentence got examined, every pause got analyzed, and sources close to the circuit began quietly filling in parts of the picture. Not on record, not publicly, but in the way that people inside a sport communicate when they want something known without saying it directly. What worried Federer, according to those familiar with the situation, wasn't Alex's talent or her work rate, it was the structure built around her. A system that had grown so large and involved so many competing interests that it had started to crowd out the individual at the center of it all. This wasn't about anyone having bad intentions, it was about too many agendas pulling in too many directions at the same time. Alex had signed major sponsorship deals earlier than most players at any level. At the time, it looked like recognition, a reward for what she'd achieved, but those contracts carried expectations that went well beyond logos on a shirt. Mandatory appearances, social media commitments, tournament selections made to maximize exposure rather than allow proper development. Each obligation made sense when you looked at it alone. Put them all together, and the schedule became so dense that rest stopped being a priority and started being something she had to fit in between everything else. She wasn't just preparing for tennis, she was performing a role. Then there was the question of the federation's involvement. The Philippine Tennis Association had put serious resources into Alex's development, training support, travel funding, national promotion. On paper, that's backing. In reality, it also means responsibility flows in both directions. Alex wasn't just representing herself anymore. She was carrying the story of a whole program, a national investment that needed results to keep justifying itself. Every match became a bigger than a match. Every loss became something that needed addressing. The coaching changes added another layer of concern. Multiple coaches came and went over a relatively short period. The official explanations always sounded reasonable, looking for the right fit, adjusting strategy, exploring new directions, but people inside the game noticed a quiet pattern. Coaches that talked about patience, long-term development, and managing load seemed to last very long. Those who pushed back against heavy schedules seemed to quietly disappear. Nobody had to say it out loud. The message was clear enough on its own. The system didn't have much space for resistance. This is probably what triggered Federer most directly. He spent his own career doing the opposite, gradually building control over his decisions, learning to listen to his body, making choices that kept him competitive deep into his late 30s. He knew exactly what happens to young players who lose their agency too early. He'd watched it happen. When he said he was worried, it wasn't speculation. It was recognition of something he'd already seen play out before.
Online forums turned into full investigation boards. Fans broke down Alex's tournament calendar month by month. Recovery gaps were minimal, travel demands were constant. When her schedule got put alongside those of other players her age, the contrast was striking. She was being asked to perform at the level of a seasoned professional while still developing physically and mentally. The data wasn't kind, even if nobody wanted to say plainly what it meant. The conversation widened beyond just Alex's situation. Women's tennis forums started connecting it to a bigger picture, young female players being commercialized aggressively before they'd fully developed, their image polished, their stories managed, their schedules optimized for revenue and exposure rather than longevity. The sport loves the rise. It rarely accounts for the cost. Mental health became impossible to keep out of the discussion. People brought up Naomi Osaka's struggles with the media in constant scrutiny. They mentioned other players who had spoken openly about burnout and anxiety. But the difference with Alex was her age in her silence. She hadn't complained. She hadn't pushed back publicly. She hadn't given any signal that anything was wrong. And that silence became the most unsettling part of all, because silence in a situation like this can mean two very different things. It can mean everything is genuinely fine, or it can mean there is no safe space to speak. When a player's career is tied to sponsors, federation funding, and commercial contracts, every word carries risk. Every comment can be taken the wrong way. Sometimes saying nothing feels like the only option that doesn't create new problems. Alex kept showing up to tournaments. She kept smiling for cameras. She kept answering questions in a way that said just enough to really say nothing. To casual observers, it looked normal. To people paying close attention, something felt guarded. Her answers had a precision to them that suggested careful management rather than genuine openness. Federer, for his part, stayed quiet after his initial comment. No clarification, no softening, no walking anything back. He just let it sit there. Some people read that as irresponsible, a powerful figure throwing a grenade into the conversation and walking off. Others read it as deliberate, a way of forcing a necessary conversation without dominating it. Either way, tennis was left holding a question it couldn't easily resolve. Where does genuine support stop and control begin? At what point does investments become a form of ownership? And who actually gets to decide what's best for a teenager whose talent has already made her commercially and politically valuable to too many people at once? Nothing visibly changed in the weeks that followed. Sponsors said nothing, officials issued safe, generic statements, coaches kept their heads down. Life in the professional circuit continued as though nothing had happened, but underneath the surface, something had cracked. Fans weren't just watching Alex's matches for the tennis anymore.
They were watching her body language, her press conference energy, her eyes during interviews, looking for signs of something they couldn't quite name. And that's when it became clear. Whether Federer was right or wrong in a technical sense stopped mattering. The conversation had already changed. The focus had shifted from results to something harder to measure. Whether winning was costing Alex something that no ranking point or trophy could ever give back. This story was never really about one comment made at a press conference in Basel. It was about what that comment forced people to finally look at directly. When the most respected player of a generation expresses genuine concern about a young star, the issue stops being personal and becomes structural. It stops being about one player and one team and one federation, and starts being about what the sport owes to the young people who carry it forward. That's the question nobody wanted to ask out loud. Federer just made sure they had to.